I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're confronting a pervasive issue with Debbie Dougherty. She has written a powerful book. It is called Sexual Harassment in Organizational Culture, a Transformative Approach. This groundbreaking book delves into the root of sexual harassment in the workplace, offering a revolutionary model for understanding and transforming organizational culture through communication. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank our team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put her in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her wonderful book. The links are below this interview. Debbie, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here today.
It's such an important topic. We were saying a little bit before the interview began, it's hard to believe that in 2024, you see so many people's lives basically ripped apart because of they're accused of sexual harassment or they're victims of sexual harassment. It's still a huge issue today. Why do you think that is, that people haven't gotten that message or haven't gotten that memo?
I think it's primarily because we're addressing it the wrong way. We continue to address it like it's an interpersonal problem. It's a problem related to the perpetrator or to the target or to the relationship, when really it's a cultural phenomenon, and we need to, especially in organizations, we need to address it at the level of the culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I think you're completely right. I mean, I think there's a wink and nod going on at some organizations that let it happen. And that's why it's pervasive as it is. So let's talk about your transformative approach. What are some of the things that an organization or a workplace can do to keep sexual harassment at bay?
That's a really, really big question and a great question. First of all, you have to understand what organizational culture is. It's not a thing. It's not a policy. You can't point to it and say, there it is, there's my culture. That's not what it is. A culture is a pattern of behavior. It's patterns of behaviors, and those behaviors become valued in the organization. And shockingly, values aren't always good. Sometimes we have toxic values as well. When we see sexual harassment woven into the fabric of an organizational culture, what's happened is that some toxic values have found their way into that culture and are supporting that destructive behavior. So how can we get organizations to prevent it or to stop it from happening? Well, first of all, acknowledge that this could be a problem. I go in to speak and I can't tell you how many organizations or organizational members are resistant to the idea that they have a problem, even though they know they have a problem, or they're suspicious of it, or they want to oversimplify it. I think some curiosity would be good to start the process. And the other thing is to recognize that you can't just change a policy or put in place some training and expect that it's going to change. It took a long time to get in there, and it's going to take a little effort to get it out.
Yeah. I think back to my days. I started in my career in broadcasting in the 80s at CBS News. And if I told you the stories of what happened in the CBS newsroom, you'd be like, oh my God. I mean, we had strippers, alcohol consumption wide open, people sitting on each other's laps. It was unbelievable. Things have improved, obviously, or so I hope. I don't work for CBS anymore. Um, so I'm not sure they still have strippers coming into the newsroom.
One hopes it's improved, yeah.
Do you think the change is that there are more women in management positions? Is that helping?
Oh, I think that can't hurt. But I also want to acknowledge that women haven't always been part of the solution, that we are part of a culture the same as everybody else, and we have ways of perpetuating a culture that can be toxic and destructive. So part of it is that more women are in. Part of it is there's more awareness, especially since the Me Too movement, of the toxicity that comes with predatory sexual behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's a good idea that companies, I know you said no one policy could fix it, But should there be a policy that you can't date, you can't have a romantic relationship with someone you work with? I mean, just look what's happening down in Georgia with the Fulton County prosecutor. I mean, she's taken a trial that implicates the president of the United States in an upcoming election and turned it into a tabloid TV show.
Yeah,
So it's real dangerous waters you're treading in once you decide to date or be romantic with somebody at work, don't you think?
I do think so. And I think that was a terrible error on their part. But I also want to acknowledge that sexual harassment is not about romance or
Mhm.
sex. It's not about sexuality or sex. It's about power.
Mhm.
So it's a really different phenomenon from, say, dating in the workplace. So those are different kinds of policies to police different kinds of behaviors. Um, they are related only in that some people use those relationships or the appearance of those relationships to enact power upon each other. And so I think each organization needs to make a determination about what to do with that.
Yeah. Sexual harassment is more akin to bullying than dating,
Mhm.
don't you think? You know, because
Yeah,
I've seen in the work on the many TV stations I've worked at, when there's a culture of sexual harassment, there's also a culture of bullying. They kind of go
yeah,
hand in hand.
they're deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
They really are. In fact, a lot of people who do bullying work use my model, the Transmock model, to help them evolve organizational cultures of.
Tell us a little bit about your model.
Well, okay. The model is fuzzy, first of all, because culture's fuzzy. And that's an important thing to recognize. You can't point to it. Even though we know it when we're in it, we kind of get a sense of it. It starts with kind of an outer layer, recognizing that our organizations are situated in a larger cultural environment. So here's the example that I like to give. I love to garden. I'm just a really big gardener. I live on a sheep farm.
Mhm.
I have a huge garden. And my garden is situated in the larger fields and pastures of my farm. And the things from my farm come in to my garden, whether I ask them to be there or not. So weeds are an example of things that come into my garden. The easiest thing that I do is I plant my garden. Same way that I think for most people, the easiest thing they do is they create an organization or they develop the organization. But the hardest thing that I have to do is try to keep those darn weeds out of my garden every every year. And that's what sexual harassment, bullying, these types of things, they are weeds that come into your organizational garden and are it's how you manage those weeds that will determine the effect that they have on the productivity of your workplace. And so the culture starts at how you manage those weeds.
Mhm.
And then how you manage those weeds starts to tell people, what do we really value? Are these the values that we say we have, what we claim to have, or are they the values that are hidden and maybe toxic? Really fascinating is that when I ask people to tell me about their values, the organizational values, how many people don't know? They don't know what my values are. Or
Right.
they'll list off values that are completely not the values that the organization claims to have. Those are the hidden values that people know about based on how they do culture, how
Yeah.
they perform culture. And then that tells us what it all means and whether or not we're going to achieve our mission and whether or not our mission is really going to be that one that we wrote down or some sort of a hidden mission that's produced by the organizational culture.
You focus on communication as the key to changing organizational culture around sexual harassment. Talk to me a little bit about communication. Are you talking about between the manager and the staff member, between HR and the team, or all of the above? Where is communication essential, and what kind of communication should be available to people who are having an issue?
That's a good question. You have to think about, to understand, you have to think about communication far more expansively than we usually think about communication. When I ask people, what is communication? They usually say, well, it's sharing information. And yeah, that's part of it, right? But it's also so much bigger than that. So it's creating persuasive messages. It's doing things. Sexual harassment actually communicates just by its very presence in the organization. It tells us things about the organization. And it's about meaning making. What does all this mean? Who are we as an organization? So instead of focusing just on communication, say that comes from human resources or human communication between managers and employees, I asked them to really think about what is their communication accomplishing bigger. So what kinds of communication patterns are being developed across the organization as opposed to just within a particular relationship? And that's the kind of communication that we need to be thinking about if we're going to be evolving cultures.
Tell us about your book, what folks will find between the covers of it, and who it is targeted to.
You know, the book has won a couple of awards, and those awards are really different kinds of awards written or that are usually targeted towards different kinds of readers. But I wrote the book for multiple audiences. And to understand that, you have to kind of think about the movie Shrek, which, see, my oldest daughter's name is Fiona. When the Shrek movie first came out, I'm like, Fiona, we have to go see Shrek. And she said, no, she's 2. No, I'm James the Train, which is from Thomas the Tank Engine. I'm like, wait, what does that have to do with Shrek? And then I found out that Fiona was the princess in Shrek. And so she's like, oh, okay. So we went. And of course, we had to buy popcorn because, movie. And we watched it and we both loved it. We loved the movie, but for really different reasons. Because the movie was written for multiple audiences. And it had multiple through lines, one for adults, one for kids. And I wrote my book thinking about Shrek and what are the different through lines that I can create. So I wrote through lines for my peers in the academic world. I also wrote it for my peers who are working to solve organizational cultural problems. So people who are consultants and trainers and human resource managers and leaders who recognize that there are issues and want to know how to address them in a more realistic way. And finally, I wrote the book for undergraduate students, and they're the hardest ones of all to please. They are a tough crowd, and they love my book. So that's one of the awards that I've received is for the book for undergraduate student purposes, but also for it's just a really good book.
Right. It is a really good book. So now you have street cred from your kids and academia cred from the other folks in academia, which is terrific as well. It's an important book. And like you said, it's a wake-up call to all of us. We should all be aware of the issues of sexual harassment. If it doesn't directly affect us, it will affect our daughters and sons. I mean, because it does go both ways. It's not just a problem against women, it's a problem against men at times as well, although that doesn't necessarily come to mind. It's a terrific book. It is called Sexual Harassment in Organizational Culture, a Transformative Approach. This is a groundbreaking book that dives into the root of sexual harassment in the workplace and offers solutions, a revolutionary model for understanding and transforming the organizations. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you.
Pleasure's all mine. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.